Emily was 8 years old when her world first broke apart. Her mother, the center of her young life, was taken by illness too quickly, leaving behind a quiet house and a father who tried his best but often seemed swallowed by his own grief. By the time Emily turned 9, her father remarried. Her new stepmother's name was Karen. She carried herself with polished grace, never a hair out of place, her smile practiced and sweet whenever neighbors dropped by. Emily wanted to like her. She even tried. Karen came with a son, Jake, a boy Emily's age who seemed to wear smugness like a second skin. He didn't have to earn attention. Karen showered him with it. The balance of the house shifted almost immediately. In public, Karen played the role of the perfect wife and caring mother, but once the front door shut, the warmth in her eyes cooled. She reserved tenderness for Jake alone. Emily became invisible, except when something needed to be blamed on someone. "Why didn't you fold the laundry properly?" Karen scolded one Saturday, holding up a wrinkled shirt as though it were a crime. Emily had spent the morning sorting, folding, and stacking until her fingers ached. Jake was in the living room, sprawled across the couch with a video game controller in his hands. Emily lowered her head. "I did. I tried." "Excuses?" Karen cut her off, her voice sharp, despite the smile she forced when Rick, Emily's father, walked into the room. "But don't worry, she's still learning. She'll get better," he said. Rick chuckled softly, kissed Karen on the cheek, and walked upstairs without noticing the way Emily's face tightened. He believed every word Karen spoke. To him, she was patient, loving, endlessly kind. Over the years, this became the pattern. Emily carried the weight of the household. Jake floated free, his every need indulged, and Karen, always so careful, kept her cruelty hidden behind closed doors. By the time Emily turned 16, silence had become her survival. She had learned to swallow anger, to endure unfairness, to bite her tongue when Jake teased and Karen twisted her words. But she also learned something else. She learned how to hope. Emily dreamed of freedom. She poured herself into school, her grades shining even as her spirit dimmed at home. She clung to the idea that one day she would leave. One day she would stand on her own without Karen's shadow looming over her. She didn't know it then, but that dream would be tested in the cruelest way possible. The scholarship was everything. It was Emily's ticket out. Her guidance counselor had told her about it months before, a program that offered full tuition, living expenses, and the chance to start fresh at a prestigious university. For weeks, Emily worked late into the night on her application essays, shaping each word carefully. She collected recommendation letters, filled out every form, and kept the stack of papers neatly in a folder on her desk. Every evening before bed, she checked it twice, almost like a ritual. On the morning the application was due, Emily reached for the folder. Her hand grasped air. Her chest tightened. She looked again, then again. Her desk was bare. Panic prickled through her. She ripped through drawers, pulled books off shelves, tossed clothes aside. No folder. She bolted downstairs, breath uneven. "Karen, have you seen my scholarship papers? The folder from my desk?" Karen looked up from her coffee, her face calm, her voice smooth. "Scholarship? I don't know what you mean." Emily's pulse pounded. "It was right there last night. I have to turn it in today." Jake smirked from the couch, munching on cereal. "Maybe you lost it. You're always forgetting things." Something inside Emily twisted. She rushed to the trash bin by the back door. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid.
The folder lay on top of crumpled napkins and food scraps, torn, pages smudged with grease, weeks of work destroyed. Her throat closed. She pulled the ruined papers out, staring at the shredded edges. Her chest burned as tears blurred her vision. Karen's voice floated from behind her, cool and unbothered. "Oh, Emily, you should really take better care of your things. Important papers shouldn't just be left lying around. Anything could happen." Emily spun toward her, her anger breaking through her shock. "You did this!" Her voice cracked, but carried steel. Karen only sipped her coffee, her lips curving into a small smile. "Now, don't be dramatic. Maybe this is a sign you're not ready for something so big." The words cut deeper than Emily expected. For hours she sat in her room, the ruined papers spread before her. She thought about quitting. She thought about the futility of fighting against someone who always seemed to win. But as night fell and the house grew silent, something inside her hardened. She wasn't going to let Karen decide her future. Emily gathered fresh sheets of paper, her hands trembling, but steadying with each word she wrote. She rewrote her essays, she begged her teachers for new letters, she pleaded with her counselor for an extension, explaining that her original documents had been ruined. The counselor listened. The deadline was extended. Emily worked with a fire she hadn't felt before. By the time she sealed the new envelope, exhaustion clung to her body, but determination lit her eyes. For the first time, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt defiance.
The days after Emily submitted her scholarship folder stretched into what felt like endless weeks. Every morning, she woke up with a knot in her stomach, unsure of whether she had saved her future or lost it for good. She had poured every bit of strength she had left into that application, rewriting essays, reprinting forms, and even staying late after school with her counselor to make sure every detail was in place. Her friends encouraged her, telling her she was brilliant and deserving. Her counselor reassured her that the committee often looked for students who showed resilience under pressure. But Emily could not stop the little voice inside her head whispering that maybe Karen had won after all. Karen, of course, was furious when she learned that Emily had managed to submit the folder despite her sabotage. She scolded Emily at the dinner table with a smile that looked sweet but cut like glass. Karen told her that no amount of rewriting could make up for her lack of worth. Jake laughed along, making jokes about how Emily was wasting her time. Rick sat quietly, his fork moving food around his plate, avoiding his daughter's eyes. Emily did not answer them. She had learned that silence was sometimes her strongest defense. Instead, she focused on her breathing, her thoughts, and the fragile hope that maybe the committee would see past everything that had been done to her. At school, Emily's grades continued to shine. She poured herself into her studies as though each assignment was a brick she was laying in the foundation of her escape. Teachers noticed her determination, praising her focus. Some classmates admired her courage, others envied her persistence. But no one knew the storm she endured each night when she returned home. Karen's cruelty grew sharper. She hid her Emily's textbooks, deleted reminders from the calendar, and even called her lazy in front of neighbors. Jake joined in with cruel laughter, never missing a chance to mock her. Yet Emily began to see something different in their eyes, a flicker of fear. For the first time, they realized that no matter how hard they tried, she would not surrender. One evening, Rick found Emily studying at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. He watched her from the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim light. For a brief moment, his lips parted, as though he wanted to speak, but the words never came. He turned away, retreating to his room, leaving Emily with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and her stack of open notebooks. Weeks passed.
Then, one afternoon, a large envelope arrived at the school office with Emily's name on it. Her counselor called her in, her eyes bright with excitement. Emily held her breath as she opened the packet, her hands trembling. The scholarship committee had not only accepted her application, they had awarded her one of the highest honors, a full scholarship. Tuition, books, and even a living allowance were covered. Tears blurred Emily's vision as relief washed over her. For a moment, all the nights of despair, all the cruel words, all the ruined papers faded into nothing. She had done it. She had built her way out of the prison Karen and Jake had tried to keep her in. But with victory came a new storm, because when she returned home with the letter, Karen's rage reached a level Emily had never seen before. When Emily returned home that evening, the letter from the scholarship committee was folded neatly in her backpack, but her heart still raced as though she was carrying something fragile made of glass. She had imagined this moment for so long, yet she felt strangely unsteady as she stepped through the front door. The house was quiet at first. Karen was in the living room watching one of her favorite shows, her legs crossed neatly, a glass of wine resting in her hand. Jake was sprawled across the couch, scrolling through his phone, his laughter erupting at something on the screen. Rick sat in his armchair, staring blankly at the muted television, his tie loosened from another long day at work. Emily's presence shifted the air. She moved toward the table and placed the letter on it with careful hands, as though the weight of her future was too heavy to keep hidden in her back. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then Jake noticed. "What's that?" he asked, his voice carrying the casual cruelty he had learned so well from his mother. Before Emily could answer, Karen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing like a hawk. "You look like you've got something to say," she remarked, her tone sugar-sweet but sharp underneath. Emily took a steady breath. "It's my scholarship result. They accepted me." Her voice was calm, but her chest pounded. Rick's head lifted slightly, his eyes flickering with something that almost looked like pride, though it was quickly buried beneath his practiced silence. Jake barked out a laugh, slapping his thigh. "You're joking. After everything, they actually gave it to you?" Karen reached for the letter and snatched it from the table before Emily could react. She tore open the folded pages, her eyes scanning each line. Her lips pressed into a thin line as the words confirmed what she did not want to believe. Emily had been chosen. She had succeeded despite every obstacle. "This doesn't mean anything," Karen said finally, her voice cold and tight. "Scholarships fall through all the time. Maybe they made a mistake. Or maybe they'll see the truth about you once they realize you're not as special as you think." But Emily saw it. For the first time in years, she saw fear in Karen's face. A tiny flicker, quickly hidden, but it was there. Jake leaned over his mother's shoulder, reading aloud in mockery. "Full scholarship, tuition covered, living allowance." He gave a low whistle. "Guess they're desperate if they're giving all that to you." Emily did not answer. She had learned long ago that feeding their cruelty only made it grow. Instead, she stood tall. Her silence spoke louder than any defense. Rick cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. That's good news," he said, softly, though his eyes never fully met Emily's. Karen turned sharply toward him, her voice slicing the air. "Good news? You think this is good news? This girl is running off to play college princess while we're left to clean up after her?" The words stung, but Emily did not flinch. She looked at her father then, just for a moment, hoping he would see her, truly see her. But he lowered his gaze again, folding into the silence that had become his shield. Karen stood, folding the letter back into its envelope with stiff, deliberate movements. She dropped it onto the table as though it were trash. "You might think you've won something, but mark my words, Emily. No piece of paper will change who you are. You're still under this roof, and you'll follow my rules until the day you leave it." Emily said nothing, but inside, something shifted. For years she had felt powerless, cornered by their cruelty. But now she knew she held something stronger than their words. She held proof that her effort, her pain, and her endurance had not been wasted. The scholarship was not just money for school, it was a key, a door opening to a life beyond Karen's reach. And Karen knew it too. That night, Emily lay awake in her room, the letter clutched against her chest. The walls that had always felt like a cage now seemed less permanent, less unbreakable. She could hear Karen's muffled voice from downstairs, angry and sharp, scolding Rick, complaining about ungrateful children and the unfairness of the world. Jake's laughter joined in, cruel and mocking, but Emily let it wash over her. For the first time, it no longer reached her bones. The fallout had begun. The balance of power in the house was shifting, and Karen could sense it slipping from her grasp.
The next few days in the house were colder than winter. Karen's smile grew sharper, her words more poisonous, and her watchful eye followed Emily everywhere. It was as though the scholarship letter had awakened something fierce and desperate inside her. She began to tighten her grip on the household. Chores doubled overnight. Emily was ordered to scrub the floors, wash the windows, and iron clothes until midnight. Karen complained loudly about grocery bills, about electricity, about every dollar that left her hands, and she always found a way to blame Emily. Jake enjoyed the spectacle. He followed Emily down hallways, whispering cruel jokes and laughing when she ignored him. At school, he hinted to classmates that Emily's scholarship had been a mistake, that she would never last a semester before failing. Rick, however, grew more distant. He left earlier for work and came home later, as if the walls of his own home had become unbearable. Sometimes when he looked at Emily, his face would flicker with something that almost resembled pride, but it was always followed by silence, as though speaking it aloud might break the fragile balance he clung to. One evening, Emily returned from school to find her acceptance packet missing from her desk. She searched every drawer, every corner of her room, her heart pounding. Finally, she walked into the kitchen and saw it sitting on the counter, open, Karen's wineglass resting dangerously close to the papers. "You don't deserve this," Karen said, not looking up from her seat. "Everything in this house is provided by me and your father, yet you think you can just walk out and leave us behind. You're ungrateful, Emily. Do you understand that? Ungrateful?" Emily steadied her breath. Her counselor had told her the scholarship was already secured, that no one could take it back, but still the thought of Karen tampering with her future made her chest tighten. Karen leaned back, her eyes gleaming. "Maybe I should call them myself. Let them know the kind of girl they've chosen. Maybe they'll change their minds once they hear the truth." For a moment, the air froze. Emily felt her knees weaken. But then a new strength rose within her. She stepped forward and met Karen's gaze. "You can call them if you want," Emily said softly, her voice steady, almost calm. "But they already know who I am, and they chose me anyway." Jake burst out laughing from across the room. "Look at her," he sneered, "acting like she's somebody now." Karen's lips tightened, but she did not reply. For the first time, she had no ready answer. Emily picked up her papers, folded them carefully, and carried them back to her room. Her hands were trembling, but her spirit was not. That night, Rick lingered at Emily's door. He knocked once, lightly, then stepped inside.
He stood there in the dim light, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Don't let them break you." Emily looked up, startled. It was the first time in years that her father had spoken against Karen and Jake. His words were few, but they carried the weight of all his silence. She nodded, her throat too tight to answer. When Rick left, closing the door softly behind him, Emily realized something important. She was not completely alone. Her father might not fight for her openly, but his quiet acknowledgement gave her a flicker of strength she did not know she needed. As spring crept in, the days grew longer, and so did Emily's resolve. She began to prepare not just for college, but for her freedom. She saved every bit of money she could earn from tutoring younger students. She gathered documents, made copies of important papers, and kept them hidden where Karen would never think to look. Karen, meanwhile, grew restless. She plotted, she schemed, and she whispered to Jake about ways to keep Emily tethered. But no matter what she tried, Emily was no longer the girl who cowered at her words. She was becoming something stronger, something Karen could not control. And deep down, Karen knew it.
Summer came slowly, carrying with it the heat of long afternoons and the buzz of restless cicadas. For Emily, each day was a countdown, each sunrise a step closer to the life waiting for her beyond the narrow walls of Karen's house. Her acceptance packet now lived in a folder she kept hidden beneath her mattress, safe from wandering hands and cruel intentions. She busied herself with preparations. Her counselor connected her with mentors, older students who had already walked the road she was about to take. Emily began to map out what her first semester would look like, circling classes in a worn catalog, jotting down notes in the margins. She worked part-time at the library, stacking books and answering questions, her paycheck slipping quietly into an envelope she tucked away in her dresser. Every dollar felt like a small piece of armor, protection for the battle still ahead. But the house grew darker as her light grew stronger. Karen prowled through the rooms with a bitterness that clung to her like perfume. She criticized Emily for spending too much time at the library, accused her of wasting money on notebooks, mocked her when she practiced presentations out loud in her room. Jake followed her with his sneers, but Emily noticed something shifting in his voice. His jokes had lost their bite. Sometimes his laughter sounded forced, like he was trying too hard to convince himself that she was still beneath him. Rick grew quieter still. He avoided arguments at the dinner table, often rising early and staying late at work. Yet now and then, Emily caught him watching her with an expression she could not fully read, something heavy, something almost like regret. One evening, while Karen was out with friends and Jake had gone to a party, Emily sat in her room making a list of things she would need for school. The silence of the house wrapped around her, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Rick knocked softly and stepped inside, carrying a folded piece of paper. He placed it on her desk without a word. Emily unfolded it to find a check, small, but enough to cover a few essentials she had been worrying about. Her father's name was scrawled in shaky ink at the bottom. Rick stood awkwardly, his voice low. "You will need more than just determination, Emily. Take this, I wish it were more." Emily's throat tightened, and she managed only a nod. Rick left the room as quietly as he had entered, but his gesture warmed a place in her heart that had been cold for too long. Karen, however, soon discovered the check. She stormed into Emily's room, her face flushed with fury, demanding to know how she had tricked Rick into giving her money. She tore through drawers, slammed doors, and hurled accusations like stones. But the damage was already done. Emily had deposited the check the very next morning. Karen's rage came too late. Neighbors began to notice cracks in the picture-perfect image Karen tried so hard to paint. She complained loudly at gatherings, speaking of Emily as if she were an ungrateful burden.
but people began to exchange glances instead of nodding along. Teachers who admired Emily's perseverance shared quiet words about her strength, and slowly, whispers began to form. Karen's control was slipping, not just inside her house, but outside of it too. One afternoon, as Emily was leaving the library, she saw Jake standing with a group of boys from school. They jeered as she walked past, but one of them asked Jake why he was wasting his time mocking his sister when she was the one leaving for college while he had no plans at all. The words hit Jake like a slap, and though he tried to laugh it off, Emily saw the flicker of shame in his eyes. For the first time, the balance was beginning to shift. That night, Emily lay awake, the sounds of Karen's angry footsteps echoing below. She knew the battle was not over, but something inside her had changed. The house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a storm, and storms always passed. The tide was turning. Slowly, steadily, the scales of karma were tipping, and Karen could feel it slipping through her grasp.
The summer heat pressed heavier as the weeks passed, and Karen's temper seemed to rise with the temperature. She could feel control slipping through her fingers like sand, and desperation drove her to new extremes. Emily kept herself busy with work, saving every cent she could. Each morning she woke before dawn, packing lunches for her shifts and carrying her scholarship papers in her bag, as though keeping them close would guard them from harm. She counted down the days until move-in, until the campus gates would open to her like a new world. But Karen was not ready to surrender her power. One late afternoon, Emily returned home from the library to find Karen waiting at the kitchen table, arms folded, a stiff smile painted across her face. A stack of envelopes lay in front of her, Emily's college letters, including the final schedule from her university. Karen had intercepted them from the mailbox. Her words were sharp, dripping with false sweetness. "You think you can just run away and leave this family? You think life will be so simple?" Emily's chest tightened, but she held steady. She reached for the envelopes, but Karen's hand slammed down on top of them. The sound echoed like a gunshot. It was Rick who entered the room at that moment, weary from work. His eyes darted between Karen's clenched hand and Emily's stiff posture. For the first time, he did not back away. He demanded Karen hand over the letters. The silence that followed felt endless. At last, with a huff of rage, Karen shoved the envelopes into Emily's arms and stormed from the room, slamming the door so hard the walls trembled. Rick lingered, his jaw tight, then muttered under his breath that enough was enough. Emily caught the words, soft but steady, and a spark of hope flickered inside her. Still, Karen's fury did not cool. That evening she took her anger out on Jake, berating him for not doing better in school, for failing to measure up to Emily despite all her efforts to keep Emily down. Jake shouted back, the first time he had dared to defy her. Their voices clashed like thunder in the hallway. Emily listened from her room, clutching her pillow, realizing that Karen's kingdom was no longer united. The following week brought the first true taste of karma. At a neighborhood gathering, Karen attempted to air her grievances again, painting Emily as a manipulative, ungrateful girl. But this time, the neighbors did not nod politely. One woman, whose daughter had been mentored by Emily at the library, spoke up and praised Emily's kindness and hard work. Another neighbor, a teacher at the school, added that Emily had been awarded one of the most competitive scholarships in the district. Karen's words faltered. The room shifted. Instead of support, she was met with silence, then sidelong glances, and finally the awkward clearing of throats. The spotlight she once controlled now burned against her. By the time she returned home, her face was red with humiliation. She slammed dishes into the sink,
cursed the neighbors for betraying her, and accused Emily of turning people against her. But deep inside, she knew the truth. Her mask had cracked, and the world was beginning to see the ugliness beneath. Meanwhile, Jake's friends had started to drift away. They teased him not only for mocking his sister, but for living in the shadow of someone who was actually achieving something. Jake's pride, once his shield, now became his wound. For Emily, the days grew brighter, even as Karen's bitterness darkened the house. She received her official housing assignment, her class schedule, and a welcome packet with her student ID tucked neatly inside. She ran her fingers over the embossed university seal and felt the weight of freedom so close she could almost breathe it. But she also knew Karen would not give up without one last strike. The storm was building again, and she could feel it on the horizon. And yet something had changed. The family no longer revolved around Karen's voice. Her grip was loosening, her throne crumbling, her power turning against her. Karma had begun its work, and Emily knew the final reckoning was near.
The last weeks of summer arrived like the slow turning of a page. Emily could feel the new life ahead of her, pulling closer, its call louder than the noise inside her house. She moved with quiet determination, packing her belongings in small steps, careful not to draw attention. Karen, however, sensed the end drawing near, and desperation made her reckless. She prowled through the house with sharp eyes, muttering under her breath about ungrateful children and a husband too weak to see the truth. Her anger no longer inspired fear. It rang hollow, like the cry of a bird trapped in its own cage. One evening, when Emily was carefully folding clothes into her suitcase, Karen barged into the room. Her face was twisted with rage. She accused Emily of abandoning her family, of taking advantage of Rick's kindness, of destroying the balance of the household. Emily stood tall. For the first time, her voice did not shake. She told Karen she was not running away, but moving forward, and that no one, not Karen, not Jake, not even her father, would stop her from claiming the future she had earned. Karen's response was swift. She snatched the suitcase from the bed and flung it to the floor, scattering clothes across the room. She shouted that Emily would regret ever defying her. The house shook with her fury, but Emily did not back down. She calmly picked up her clothes, piece by piece, folding them again with steady hands. It was then that Rick appeared in the doorway. He had heard enough. For years, he had stood by in silence, but something in Emily's quiet defiance stirred the part of him that had once been a protector. His voice was firm, stronger than Emily had ever heard it. He told Karen to leave Emily alone. Karen spun on him, spitting venom, accusing him of betrayal, of weakness, of destroying the family. But Rick did not flinch. He repeated his command, louder this time, his face pale but resolute. The power that Karen had held over him for so long cracked in that instant. Jake entered the hallway, drawn by the commotion. He saw his mother raging, his father standing tall, and his sister unbroken. For the first time, the lies he had clung to began to unravel. He did not speak, but the silence on his face was enough. Karen stood alone. The following days unfolded quickly. Emily's departure date arrived. Rick helped carry her suitcases to the car. He did not say much, but the way he lifted the heavy bags spoke more than words. Jake hovered nearby, restless, torn between resentment and a growing awareness that his mother's cruelty had robbed them both. Karen stood on the porch, arms crossed, her fury simmering beneath the surface. She called after Emily, hurling insults, trying to carve scars with her words. But the sound no longer cut. It washed over Emily like the fading roar of a storm retreating into the distance. As the car pulled away, Emily looked back only once.
She saw Karen shrinking in the rearview mirror, her arms flailing in helpless rage. She saw Jake staring silently at the ground, and she saw her father's tired face, lined with sorrow, but touched, at last, with a flicker of pride. The campus welcomed her like a new dawn. Wide lawns, tall buildings, and faces filled with ambition surrounded her. She stepped into her dorm room, placing her scholarship folder neatly on the desk. For the first time in her life, the air she breathed felt truly hers. But karma did not end at the edge of the campus. In the weeks that followed, word spread back home. Neighbors continued to praise Emily, sharing her story as one of perseverance and triumph. Karen found herself unwelcome at gatherings where she had once held court. People no longer believed her complaints. They saw them for what they were: bitterness and lies. Jake struggled, his old friends drifting away as they chased their own futures. The comparisons to Emily grew heavier, and the respect he once commanded slipped through his fingers. He began to feel the weight of the choices he had made, and though he did not say it out loud, the echo of regret followed him. Rick moved through the days quietly, no longer blind to the truth. His silence had cost him dearly, and though he remained with Karen, something in his eyes had changed. The illusion of her control was gone, replaced with a weary recognition that he had allowed cruelty to rule his home. And Karen, herself, once proud, once untouchable, was left to face the hollow throne she had built. Her anger consumed her, but it could not rebuild what had been lost. Her kingdom of fear had collapsed, and the only one she had truly destroyed was herself. Emily, meanwhile, flourished. She attended her first classes with wide eyes and steady determination. Professors noticed her dedication. Classmates admired her resilience. Each step she took across campus paths was a step further from the shadows of her old life, and a step closer to the woman she was meant to become. On quiet nights, she would sit beneath the campus lights, notebook in hand, dreaming of the stories she would one day tell, the stories of hardship, of resistance, of victory. And deep in her heart, she carried the knowledge that the storm had passed, and she had not only survived it, but risen beyond it. Justice had not arrived in the form of grand punishments or dramatic endings. It had come in quieter ways: the loss of respect, the shattering of illusions, the exposure of lies. Karen had lost the power she once wielded. Jake had lost the pride that shielded him, and Rick had lost the excuse of silence. That was the work of karma. Emily had gained her freedom. She had gained her future, and in the crucible of cruelty, she had been forged into something stronger than her stepmother could ever break. The story had reached its end, but Emily's life was only beginning.